All right, so let's dive right in, shall we? John 13, 1-17. I know you, as pastors and Bible study leaders, you live and breathe this passage.
You know it backward and forward.
But that's exactly why we're here, right? We're going deep, looking for those nuggets of insight.
Yeah, those fresh perspectives that you can take back to your congregation.
And I got to tell you, going through this stack of sermons, the first thing that really jumped out at me were the illustrations.
Oh yeah, some really creative ones.
Like one pastor compared Jesus washing the disciples' feet to this story about Xerxes,
Xerxes, the Persian king.
the one and only. Apparently, he tried to punish the sea.
Punish the sea. How do you even...
I know, right? But it gets even better. He tried to punish the sea for destroying his bridge.
Okay, now that's a serious temper tantrum.
Right. And that's exactly the points the pastor was making. It's such a stark contrast, right?
Worldly power versus the authority of Jesus.
Xerxes, he's all about control, throwing a fit when things don't go his way.
And then you have Jesus kneeling down, washing his disciples' feet. It's powerful.
And, to the disciples, this wouldn't have just been some weird gesture. This was a task for the lowest of servants.
Absolutely. You're talking about a culture where social hierarchy was everything.
And for Jesus, the Son of God, to do this, unthinkable.
Totally radical. It really makes you question those ideas of power and influence, even within the church.
One pastor actually went so far as to critique the Seven Mountains mandate.
The one that advocates for Christian dominance in society?
That's the one.
Yeah.
He was basically saying, look, this idea completely misses the point of John 13.
It's about servanthood, not dominance. It's about emulating Jesus, not conquering the world.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really interesting theme that came up a lot. Intentional service.
Intentional service.
Yeah, several pastors pointed out that this wasn't just some random act of kindness from Jesus.
He planned it.
Gathered the tools, washed all the disciples' feet, even Judas's.
Knowing he was about to be betrayed.
It adds a whole new level to the act, right?
Oh.
It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing. It was deliberate.
It makes you think about the intentionality behind our own acts of service.
Are we just going through the motions, or are we really present, really serving with purpose?
And are we willing to serve even when it's tough, even when it involves people who might hurt us?
I mean, let's be real. Washing Judas's feet knowing he was about to betray you, that's some next-level love.
That's what several sermons really honed in on, Jesus' love transcending betrayal.
The Greek word agape came up a lot. Unconditional love.
It's such a stark contrast to the disciples' ambition, their desire for status.
They're worried about who's the greatest, and Jesus is over there washing their feet.
Talk about a different definition of greatness.
One pastor actually shared this really powerful story. He had received a prophetic word about enduring trials,
Oh, wow.
about death leading to life.
Yeah.
And he connected back to John 13.
Saying that even in those dark moments facing betrayal, Jesus' love never wavers.
It's a message of hope and resilience.
Yeah, and it reminds us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice, it's a posture we take.
And that was another big theme that kept popping up. Love as posture, not technique.
I feel like that.
One pastor even quoted Trevor Hudson. He said, technique asks, how do I love? While posture simply asks, where am I?
That's good. So it's not about having a checklist. It's about being present with others with that attitude of love.
Right. Think about it. We saw all these different illustrations in the sermons.
Whoa, yeah, like that one about gym mentorship.
That was great. The pastor talked about feeling lost when he first started going to the gym.
Intimidating, right? All those machines, all those super fit people.
And then this experienced gym goer, he takes them under his wing, shows them the ropes.
It's a perfect analogy for discipleship.
The more experienced Christian, they're not just ticking boxes, they're present, they're guiding, they're investing in the other person.
And then there was that one with the graduation ceremony.
Oh yeah, where they hand out towels instead of diplomas.
What a visual. It's like saying, forget about worldly success. True greatness is about service, about humility.
And speaking of getting your hands dirty, I keep thinking about that story of Vani.
The woman who turned her life around through prison ministry.
That's the one. Talk about embodying humility and love.
She wasn't preaching from a pulpit. She was showing up week after week, listening, offering companionship.
It's those simple acts of service, consistently done, that make all the difference.
It's about meeting people where they are, loving them authentically.
And that, I think, is a powerful takeaway for our listeners.
Absolutely. How can we encourage our congregations to move beyond simply knowing about Jesus' example and actually living it out?
It's about bridging that gap between knowledge and action.
And I think these sermons give us some really practical and inspiring ways to do just that.
Speaking of changing the world, there's another point that I think is really crucial, and that came up in a few of these sermons.
It's not just about serving others, it's also about allowing ourselves to be served.
Oh, that's a good point, isn't it?
Mm.
It's something we often overlook, I think.
Right. One pastor told this really humbling story about moving to a new church and accepting help from the congregation.
Yeah, that vulnerability can be tough.
Yeah.
You know, especially for pastors.
Absolutely. But that's where true humility comes in, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing that we don't have to do everything ourselves.
Yeah, and that it's okay to rely on others.
Exactly. It's that whole, it's more blessed to give than to receive thing.
Right, but we often forget about the receiving part.
And when we allow ourselves to be served, it actually creates space for others to experience the joy of giving.
It kind of completes the circle, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit, we also notice some interesting connections that pastors made between John 13:1-17 and the Last Supper.
Oh yeah, the broader context of Jesus' impending death.
Exactly. One sermon in particular drew this powerful parallel between Jesus as the Passover Lamb and the Old Testament sacrificial system.
So connecting Jesus' act of humility to his ultimate sacrifice.
Precisely. It was emphasizing that even knowing he was about to die, Jesus still chose to humble himself and serve.
Wow, that adds another layer to the whole thing, doesn't it? It's not just about the foot washing, it's a foreshadowing of the sacrifice on the cross.
And it reminds us that true leadership isn't about power, it's about serving others even to the point of death.
Powerful stuff. And, speaking of connections, I was also struck by the sheer variety of cross-references that these pastors used.
Oh yeah, they were pulling from all over the Bible.
Passages about love, service, humility, trusting God in the face of betrayal.
It just shows how this one passage in John connects to so many different aspects of the faith.
For example, one sermon referenced Philippians 2.
The one where Paul talks about Jesus humbling himself and taking the form of a servant.
That's the one. It's such a classic passage on servanthood.
And then another sermon brought up Hebrews 10, talking about Christ's sacrifice as a once-and-for-all offering for sins.
Right, tying it back to that Passover Lamb imagery.
And of course, there were tons of references to passages that encourage us to follow Jesus' example.
Like John 15.14, 1 John 2.6.
Those are great reminders that this isn't just a story about Jesus being humble, it's a call to action for us.
To live out that same humility and service in our own lives.
And it wasn't just Bible verses either.
Oh, you mean the quotes?
Yeah, the pastors used some really insightful quotes and illustrations from non-biblical sources.
Like that Martin Luther King Jr. quote.
One doesn't need a college degree to serve, only a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love.
That's so good. It's a reminder that serving isn't about our qualifications. It's about the posture of our hearts.
And there was that Gandhi quote, too.
Oh yeah, the one about finding yourself by losing yourself in the service of others.
It's beautiful, isn't it? It speaks to the transformative power of service.
For both the one serving and the one being served.
And speaking of transformative power, I keep coming back to that story about Vani.
Ah, yes, the woman who found redemption through prison ministry.
Her story really embodies that idea that even in the darkest of places, among those who society has cast aside, the love of Christ can shine through.
It's a reminder that service isn't just about doing good deeds. It's about encountering Christ in the faces of those we serve.
And allowing ourselves to be transformed by those encounters.
Which brings us to another important point that emerged from these sermons. Serving others isn't just about doing things for them. It's about being present with them.
Yes. One pastor talked about the importance of simply being present as an act of love.
It's about listening, empathizing, offering genuine connection.
Recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every person regardless of their circumstances.
And sometimes that simple act of presence can be the most profound form of service.
Absolutely. It can be the catalyst for healing, reconciliation, transformation.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the most impactful acts of service are the quietest ones.
The ones that don't seek recognition or applause.
The ones that flow from a genuine love for others.
And a desire to see them flourish.
Speaking of flourishing, there was also this interesting theme that emerged around service as a pathway to true greatness.
Ah, yes. The idea that in God's kingdom, the path to greatness is paved with humility and service.
One sermon even used the Greek term doulos,
meaning servant or slave,
to highlight the voluntary nature of Jesus' servanthood.
It's a radical concept, isn't it? That true greatness is found not in power or status, but in willingly choosing to serve.
It definitely challenges our worldly notions of success.
And it invites us to embrace a different kind of leadership, one that's rooted in humility, compassion, and selflessness.
And it's not just about serving those outside the church.
Oh, absolutely. One sermon specifically emphasized the importance of serving within the church community.
It talked about how Jesus washing the disciples' feet was a model for how we should relate to one another as believers.
It's about using our gifts to build each other up, encourage one another, bear each other's burdens,
Creating a culture of love and service within the church,
where everyone feels valued and supported.
and where we're all committed to serving one another in humility and love.
It's a beautiful vision.
It is. And it's a vision that we can actually strive to live out in our own churches and communities.
Absolutely. And it starts with each of us embracing the example of Jesus in John 13:1-17.
Choosing to humble ourselves,
And serve others with love and compassion,
even when it's difficult.
even when it's messy.
Because that's where true greatness lies.
In the messy, beautiful act of service.
As we've been talking about all these different perspectives on John 13:1-17,
It really struck me how rich and deep this passage is.
it's amazing how such a familiar story can still offer so much fresh insight.
And challenge us in new ways.
It's like peeling back another layer of the onion.
And discovering even more beauty and complexity.
Makes you wonder what other treasures are hidden within these familiar stories.
Just waiting to be unearthed.
And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive, right?
Exactly. Digging deep into the familiar.
And discovering those hidden gems.
That can transform our lives and our ministries.
So to all you pastors and Bible study leaders listening,
Don't be afraid to dig deep into those familiar passages.
you never know what treasures you might find.
And how those treasures might inspire and equip you.
To lead your congregations into deeper levels of faith and service.
And as you continue to explore John 13:1-17,
I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder.
how can you make the message of humility and service come alive for your congregation?
What practical steps can you take to embody this message in your own life?
And how can you encourage your church community to become a true embodiment of Christ's love and service?
Those are challenging questions,
But they're questions worth wrestling with.
because the answers have the potential to transform.
Not just our churches.
But our world, it
Yeah.
really is about making a difference, isn't it? And one thing that stood out to me was the connection between service and spiritual growth.
Yeah, it's not just about doing good deeds for the sake of it.
Right. It's about service being part of how we grow spiritually.
One pastor said something like, service is the gymnasium of the soul.
Oh, I like that. It's like exercise for our spirits.
Yeah.
Helps us get stronger in our faith.
Exactly. And when we think about it that way, it's not just about checking things off a list.
It's more about being humble, willing to be used by God.
Letting go of our own plans and seeing where God takes us.
And that's where things get exciting, right?
Absolutely. It's those unexpected moments, those messy situations where we grow the most.
That's so true. And that's really what I hope everyone listening takes away from this whole conversation about John 13.
It's not just a story to think about.
It's an invitation to live a life of humility and service.
It's challenging, but it's also so rewarding.
It can change the world.
So pastors, Bible study leaders, take these insights back to your congregation.
Share these illustrations, these new perspectives on John 13:1-17.
Encourage them to go beyond just knowing about Jesus' example.
To actually start living it.
And let's all work towards making service a way of life in our communities.
Because when we serve others, we're not just helping them, we're also encountering Christ.
And that's powerful.
That's a truth worth sharing.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into John 13:1-17.
We'll be back next time with a whole new set of sources, ready to uncover more inspiring insights for your ministries.